Have you ever felt love at first sight? I used to believe in it, or at least I wanted to. But the older I get, the more I realize that what we call love at first sight is usually something very different. It's not love, it's the moment you fall in love with an idea of a person, an image you build in your head the instant you see them. In that split second, you don't know how they handle conflict. You don't know how they communicate when they're tired, stressed, or disappointed. You don't know what they value, what they avoid, or what they run from. What you're reacting to is appearance, energy, timing, and your own expectations. You're not seeing the person. You're projecting onto them. That's why the chances of love at first sight turning into a stable, long-lasting connection are actually pretty low. The version of them you fell for usually isn't real. It's a placeholder your mind created to fill in the gaps before reality arrives. And when reality does arrive, it often clashes with the fantasy. In most cases, what people describe as love at first sight is closer to attraction, or, at best, infatuation. Strong chemistry, curiosity, desire. There's nothing wrong with that. It's human. But somewhere along the way, we started dressing it up in a more romantic narrative. I just knew. I felt something instantly. I saw them and everything clicked. It sounds better than admitting, I was extremely attracted to you, and my brain did the rest. That doesn't mean meaningful relationships can't start with a powerful first impression. They can. But the love part, the real part, only shows up later. After conversations. After disappointment. After choosing each other when the initial spark isn't doing all the work anymore. Love isn't formed in a glance. It's built in time. So when someone says they fell in love at first sight, what I hear now is this. I met someone, and my imagination ran faster than reality. And sometimes, reality catches up. Most of the time, it doesn't. Someone can be attractive, sure, but that attraction can disappear just as fast as it appeared. That happens to me all the time. I might notice someone for a split second and think, okay, they're attractive. And then the next 3 to 5 seconds happen. The way they talk, the way they treat people, the way they carry themselves. And just like that, whatever spark was there turns into neutrality, or sometimes even dislike. For me, attraction doesn't survive on looks alone. What actually keeps it alive is who someone is when they open their mouth, how they react to small things, how they behave when they don't think they're being watched. Personality doesn't just add to attraction for me, it decides it. The older I get, the faster I see this. I don't need weeks or months anymore. Sometimes it takes seconds. And because of that, I feel less and less instant attraction overall. Not because people are worse, but because I see past the surface quicker. That's why the idea of love at first sight just doesn't make sense to me. How can you love someone before you've seen how they handle stress, disappointment, disagreement, or boredom? Before you've seen how they treat strangers, how they talk about people when they're not around, or how they show respect? At best, what people call love at first sight feels like a momentary projection, a reaction to appearance mixed with imagination. It might feel intense, but intensity isn't depth. For me, attraction that lasts is built on reality, not impressions. And the more experience I have with people, the less patience I have for confusing a quick spark with something meaningful. Love doesn't happen in a glance. It happens when attraction survives contact with who someone actually is. I define love at first sight a little differently than most people. To me, it's not romance. It's not admiration. It's not even attraction in the usual sense. It's a moment when something chemical fires in your brain, fast, primitive, and completely unconscious. It can happen before you even like the person, before you hear their voice, before you know a single thing about who they are. It's instinct, and I do believe it's real. I think it exists for a very basic reason: survival and reproduction. A leftover mechanism in our subconscious that doesn't care about compatibility, values, or long-term stability. It just recognizes something and says, this matters. Not logically, biologically. That's why it can feel so powerful, so invasive, so hard to ignore. I've experienced it twice in my life, and I wouldn't call myself lucky for it. Both times, it hit without permission, a kind of tunnel vision. Prolonged eye contact that felt almost dangerous, like staying there a second too long would pull me somewhere I didn't intend to go. It wasn't desire in a controlled sense. It was more like my body reacting faster than my mind could catch up. What scared me wasn't the feeling itself, but how little it cared about context. Both times, my life was already moving in a direction. Commitments existed. Values existed. And yet, this instinct didn't care. It wasn't asking. It was asserting. What I'm proud of, and still surprised by, is that I managed to stop it. Not by pretending it wasn't happening. Not by romanticizing it. But by consciously stepping away. I broke eye contact deliberately, even though every part of me resisted doing so. I physically removed myself from the situation. And then came the harder part, dealing with the aftermath. Because the images don't disappear right away. For days afterward, the memory would surface uninvited. Faces replaying, moments looping, a sense of unfinished intensity that didn't belong anywhere in my real life. Both times, it took about 2 days of deliberate mental effort to push those images out, to stop feeding the instinct until it burned itself out. And it did burn out. That's the part people don't talk about. These experiences feel eternal in the moment, but they're fragile. They don't grow stronger with time. They fade when you stop reinforcing them. They only become dangerous when you mistake them for meaning. Could that instinct save a dying relationship? Maybe. In the short term, it's powerful enough to override doubt, exhaustion, and dissatisfaction for a while. But instinct isn't loyalty. It isn't trust. And it definitely isn't love. Real love doesn't hijack your body. It invites your mind. Love at first sight, as people describe it, isn't wisdom or destiny. It's chemistry pretending to be truth. And chemistry doesn't care about consequences, only reaction. Understanding that difference is what allowed me to walk away from it both times. Not because I'm stronger than instinct, but because I'm aware of what it actually is. My girlfriend came into my life at a moment when I wasn't looking for love at all. I was looking for a training partner. I had just come out of a messy situation with my ex, someone I trusted, who took my money and disappeared without any real explanation. I was trying to keep myself busy, focused, grounded. Training felt like the safest distraction I could find. That's how she found me. At first, we were just talking. Just training. No flirting, no expectations. Honestly, I didn't even realize she was a woman at first. She felt more like a mirror, someone who understood exactly where I was without me having to explain it. We had an uncomfortable amount in common. Similar past relationships. Similar mistakes. Similar moments where we'd both stayed too long in situations that were already broken. We were both in that phase where you're trying to let go, heal quietly, and not jump straight into something new. So that's what we did, together. We supported each other through cutting ties, through uncomfortable truths, through rebuilding routines. There were no promises, no labels, just two people using each other's presence to move forward without commitment. And somewhere along the way, feelings showed up anyway. That's when things got complicated. She panicked, pulled away, tried to disappear. And when she did, it broke me more than I expected. I didn't chase her emotionally, but I did need closure. I tracked her down and asked her to talk. Not to argue, just to be honest. That conversation changed everything. We didn't fight. We didn't blame. We said things cleanly, directly, without drama. We ended things on the best terms possible, respectful, calm, real. And I accepted it. Or at least, I thought I had. The next day, she came back. Not casually, not with excuses. She came back apologizing, asking for forgiveness, admitting fear and confusion. Most rational people would have said no. Everything about the situation screamed too fast and too messy. But I said yes. Since then, everything has been intense, but not chaotic. I'm training harder. I've gone back to studying math. I'm preparing to move closer to her in December. We're both busy, focused, disciplined people, but we're also intentionally growing for each other. It's strange how fast it all happened, barely a month, and yet it feels like we've known each other for years. Not because of fantasy or obsession, but because we met each other in a raw, honest place. No pretending, no performance, no illusions. Just two people who weren't looking for love, and somehow found something real anyway. It's funny, because lately this has been happening more often than I'd like to admit. For a long time, I felt out of sync with people. I didn't understand them, and they didn't really understand me either. That came with a lot of self-doubt along the way, wondering if I was cold, broken, or just wired wrong. Eventually, I stumbled across the whole demi-spectrum, and suddenly a lot of things clicked. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I do feel initial attraction. I notice people. I register it. But I never act on it. Not impulsively, not instinctively. For me, it's more like the first checkbox on a list. A quiet acknowledgement. Okay, there's something here. And then, nothing happens. At least not yet. Attraction alone doesn't move me. So I guess it depends on what definition of love we're using here. By my standards? No. I've never experienced love at first sight. Not in the fairy tale sense people usually mean it. Not the instant, fully formed certainty that this is the person. But there's a caveat. The day I met my most recent ex, something did happen. I didn't fall in love. I didn't imagine a future. I didn't feel desire rush through me like a wave. What I felt was recognition. A quiet, overwhelming sense that this person was different. Important. Significant in a way I couldn't explain or ignore. It was strong enough that my memories of that day are oddly blurry. Like my brain was overloaded and decided to skip recording the details. I remember fragments, the setting, the sound of her voice, the way time seemed to slip, but not the full picture. I just disappeared into the moment. Looking back, it wasn't love at first sight. It was more like my intuition flagging something before my logic had time to catch up. A signal, not a conclusion. An opening, not a destination. And that's the distinction I've come to trust. For me, love doesn't arrive fully formed. It builds slowly, through safety, understanding, and shared reality. Anything that feels instant is just awareness, not attachment. Still, that first moment matters. Not because it defines the outcome, but because sometimes it tells you to pay attention. Not everything that feels powerful is love, but sometimes it's the beginning of something worth staying present for. There can be sparks. I don't deny that. You can meet someone and feel something almost instantly. A pull, a curiosity, a strange sense of ease. Sometimes there's even chemistry without closeness, without shared experiences, without real knowledge of who the other person is. A look, a voice, the way they carry themselves. The brain fills in the gaps quickly. I felt that before, but I've learned to be careful with it. Because sparks are easy. They're cheap in a way. They're built on first impressions, projections, and assumptions we didn't even realize we were making. They feel intense, but they don't ask much of you. They don't require patience, trust, or sacrifice. They're exciting and shallow at the same time. Real love isn't like that. When I think about love in its truest sense, the kind where you'd stand between someone and danger without hesitation, the kind where you'd give up comfort, pride, or certainty without needing an explanation, that doesn't come from a moment. It comes from time, from seeing someone at their worst and choosing them anyway, from knowing how they break, how they cope, how they fail, and how they try again. That kind of love grows slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. You don't feel it explode. You notice it one day because it's already there. Chemistry can make you lean in. Attraction can make you curious. Even emotional intensity early on can feel overwhelming. But none of that equals the kind of love where you'd say, without drama or hesitation, I'd die for this person. That level of devotion isn't built on a glance. It's built on shared reality. So if the question is whether love can exist at first sight, the honest answer, for me, is no. There can be sparks. There can be fascination. There can be a sense of possibility. But real love, the kind that's unquestioning, grounded, and deeply human, that has to be earned. By time, by trust, by choosing each other when it's no longer easy. I don't believe it exists. Not because I'm cynical, but because I've watched how differently people are built when it comes to love. Some people are capable of it. Deeply, steadily, painfully even. And some people simply aren't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Love isn't universal in the way we like to pretend it is. There are people who can't even sit alone with themselves without discomfort. People who don't know how to treat themselves with kindness, who live in constant self-judgment, comparison, or emotional chaos. And if you don't know how to love yourself, not in a motivational poster way, but in a quiet, responsible, honest way, how are you supposed to recognize real love with another person? You can feel attraction, need, curiosity, dependency, relief, escape, but none of that is love. A lot of what people call love is actually timing, or loneliness, or trauma lining up just right. Sometimes someone shows up when you're broken, and they feel important because they were there, not because they were right. Sometimes you need someone to teach you a lesson, to hold up a mirror, or to help you survive a chapter. And when that chapter ends, so does the illusion. Looking back, you realize they weren't the one. They were the person you needed then. And that's hard to accept, because it makes love feel less romantic and more selective. Conditional. Uneven. Some people fall in love easily, often loudly. Others move through years without ever feeling it. Not because they're cold, but because they're cautious or wounded or still learning who they are. And some confuse intensity for meaning, urgency for depth, obsession for connection. Love requires a certain internal structure. It asks for emotional responsibility, self-awareness, the ability to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. If someone hasn't built that inside themselves, whatever they feel, no matter how powerful, won't become love. It will collapse under pressure. So when people talk about love at first sight, I don't hear destiny. I hear projection. A story formed in seconds, filled in by imagination, fueled by desire or hope. And sometimes that story survives long enough to feel real, until reality asks it to grow up. And it can't. Maybe you were drawn to them. Maybe they mattered. Maybe they changed you. But that doesn't mean it was love. Sometimes people come into your life not to be loved forever, but to teach you what love is not. And recognizing that, that's its own kind of clarity. The first time someone told me they loved me, it happened fast. Too fast. We had known each other for maybe 3 weeks. We'd talked late into the night, shared childhood stories, laughed at the same dumb things, finished each other's sentences like we'd rehearsed it. And one evening, sitting in a car with the engine off and the windows fogged up, they said it like it was a fact. I knew the moment I saw you. I remember nodding, smiling, saying it back. What I remember even more clearly is the feeling a few seconds later, the quiet panic of realizing I had no idea what I had just agreed to. At the time, I wanted to believe in it. Love at first sight sounded comforting, clean, efficient, like skipping the messy parts and getting straight to certainty. It felt good to think that something so complicated could be so simple. But the days that followed didn't feel simple at all. Nothing was wrong, exactly. They were kind, attentive, intense in a way that felt flattering and heavy at the same time. Every reaction was bigger than the moment required. Every silence was interrogated. Every delay in reply carried meaning it shouldn't have had. And slowly, I realized that what they loved wasn't me, not really. They loved the way I looked at them when they talked, the way I listened, the version of me that existed before I disagreed, before I set boundaries, before I disappointed them. They loved a version of me that had never been tested by time, stress, boredom, or conflict. When the first real disagreement happened, not even a fight, just a difference, something shifted. Confusion turned into frustration. Admiration turned into accusation. Suddenly I wasn't the one. I was changed. But I hadn't changed. They were just meeting me for the first time. That's when it hit me. Love at first sight doesn't survive reality. Not because reality is cruel, but because love needs context. It needs friction. It needs repetition. It needs ordinary days, not cinematic moments. You can't know how you feel about someone until you see how they handle being tired, being wrong, being disappointed. You can't know love until you've watched someone fail and stayed anyway, or until you've failed yourself and weren't abandoned for it. What people call love at first sight is usually recognition, of familiarity, of chemistry, of something unresolved inside them responding to a trigger. It's the nervous system firing, not the heart making a decision. Years later, when I finally did fall in love, it didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived quietly, after months of conversations that didn't try to impress, after silence that didn't feel threatening, after arguments that ended with understanding instead of drama. There was no single moment I could point to, no story I could tell that sounded romantic enough for movies. But there was trust, and patience, and a feeling of safety that didn't depend on intensity. And that's how I know now. If it feels instant, overwhelming, and absolute, it probably isn't love. Love doesn't strike you. It grows into you, slowly enough that you don't notice when it happens, only when you realize it's no longer optional.